Liberal Party. And he came to me and he was trying to make chit-chat, and taking an interest in my riding, he asked me where I was from. I said Alberta, more formally Lethbridge, and he said, oh, that's a rural riding. I said, yeah, it's mixed with a small urban center. And he said, oh, so you have farms? I said, yeah, we have farms. He said, oh, well, what do you produce? So I gave him the list. We produce chicken, eggs, beef, pork, buffalo, grain, cereals, pulses, dairy. And I'm proud of this. And then he turned to me and had a little bit of an inquisitive look, and he said, well, you produce grain. I said, yeah. He said, well, you don't really produce it for food though, do you? It's just for fuel. And I said, excuse me? Because I didn't think I quite understood him. And he said, well, yeah, like, it's just for fuel, right? And I explained to this member that, sure, like some of it is, but mostly it's for silage or for animal food or for human consumption, the vast majority. And he said, oh, and a little bit dumbfounded, he kind of shrugged his shoulder and said, that's weird because I thought most Canadians just got their food at the grocery store. I will let this member remain nameless for his sake. But I share the story for this reason, because it highlights just how out of touch this Liberal government is when it comes to Canadians, when it comes to their way of life, when it comes to this big, beautiful, vast country we call Canada, and all of the incredible things that are done here. It shows the lack of knowledge that exists when it comes to rural areas and how hard-working, innovative, creative, entrepreneurial farmers are. Meanwhile, this government likes to exercise its ego, engage in theatrics, and mostly virtue signal, which is primarily what the carbon tax is all about. The carbon tax. They talk about it as if it's this, oh, what's that phrase? Cost of pollution. Cost on pollution? Price, thank you. Price on pollution. Thank you. I knew I didn't have it quite right there. I appreciate that help there. A price on pollution. Now, I'm going to get to that in just a moment because I find it rather an interesting term. But what I wish to highlight here is that they have put this in place, but have not met a single climate target. So that would mean that it can't be a solution. It's simply signaling a virtue. Now, I would say that it's a failed experiment. But what's interesting to me is that even in signaling a virtue, it's a virtue that applies to all others, but not actually to this party or this government. Here's why. Because we're talking about Liberal members who get on a jet. Multiple of them will get on jets and fly halfway around the world, multiple times over, to be able to go to climate conferences. We're talking about a prime minister who has no problem getting on his private jets and going to places for frivolous reasons, surfing, perhaps on important days. We're talking about a prime minister who has no problem living in one residence and having his food prepared for him in another, and then driven over in a vehicle that uses fossil fuels on a daily basis. Interesting. So this virtue that is being signaled, which is to care for the environment, applies to everybody else, but not the Liberal members. It's incredibly disingenuine. It's incredibly hypocritical, and it's harming Canadians because it's driving up the cost of everything. What we see then is essentially the Liberals' prescribed solution as simply being therapy for their guilty conscience, but not actually something that is creating real change. It's shameful, because it's punitive towards Canadians just to help them sleep better at night while accomplishing nothing. Let's talk about those farmers, shall we? Let's talk about what they really do. Because contrary to some of the Liberals' belief, they don't just grow crops for fuel. They do happen to feed not only our own country, but the world. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about those hard-working individuals. In 1978, there was a radio broadcaster by the name of Paul Harvey, and he gave a speech entitled, "So God Made a Farmer." God made a farmer. And in it, he outlined the incredible characteristics that a farmer would hold to be a fit caretaker of the land and the animals. And he reflected on someone who was hardworking and tough enough to bear the weight and struggle of adversity, yet gentle enough to care for the animals in a beautiful way. And in his speech, he hypothesized, and I quote, God said, "I need somebody willing to sit up all night with a newborn colt and watch it die, then dry his eyes and say, maybe next year. I need somebody who can shape an axe from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make a harness out of haywire, feed sacks, and shoe scraps, and who planting time and harvest season will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday at noon. And who planting time, and then pain from tractor back, put in another 72 hours. So God made a farmer." In this simple yet powerful tribute, he really does capture those who work night and day and who often overcome challenge and tribulation in order to care for the needs of our population, but also the population of the world. It's remarkable. We're talking about individuals who are really the pioneers in looking after the environment. These folks look after the land, the soil, the air, the water, like nobody else. Yet this government insists that they too need to be penalized with a carbon tax. We're talking about folks who heat their barns in order to care for their animals, who dry their grain so that they can get it to market, who irrigate so that they can have crops, who transport livestock so that you can pick them up in the freezer section. That's what we're talking about here. Now, of course, that cost gets passed down from the farmer to Canadians. And unfortunately, we've seen as groceries have skyrocketed due to poor Liberal mismanagement, terrible policies, i.e. carbon tax. And so individuals, 20% of them are skipping meals. Food banks are serving people at an astronomical rate, more than ever. Canadians are finding it difficult to make their way to the end of the month, still being able to feed their families. And they can expect that in 2023, their grocery bills are actually going to go up by another $1,100, thanks to this Liberal government, the carbon tax, and their mismanagement of the overall economy and out-of-control spending. But that's not where they want to stop. They also want to go after fertilizer use. Now, of course, we're talking about farmers who already are trying to run a business, and so they're using fertilizer with great care, making sure that their input costs are minimal, so not wanting to use very much. Fertilizer is expensive, in case the folks across the way didn't know. And so, of course, they're wanting to use as little as possible in order to get the greatest yield possible still. But this government feels that they need to be punished even for that. How dare they want to feed the country? How dare they want to feed the world? How dare they want to increase their yield? And so they go after fertilizer use. They penalize the farmers for it. Meanwhile, the cost of living continues to increase. Canadians continue to pay the price. Farmers continue to be demonized instead of celebrated as the incredible people they are. Today, the motion that is before us is one calling for this government to dare to lean in and understand the act of farming, to dare to understand the impact of their policies on the Canadian people, and to give them a break for the sake of families, for the sake of seniors, for the sake of those living with a disability, for the sake of each and every woman and child and man across this country. They deserve a break.
Questions and comments? The honourable for Avalon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I somewhat thank the member for her speech, I guess, but just for comparison, she compares the whole Liberal bench to one question that she asked to one member back when she was first elected, and maybe when that person was first elected. And she said she's from rural Alberta. Well, I live in rural Newfoundland and Labrador. I grew up in a household, we grew all our own vegetables. We never had to buy anything in the way of vegetables from one season to the next. We kept a horse, we raised a pig for food later. We'd slaughter the pig and do whatever with it. But the member makes it seem like it's all about her and her constituents. It's about everyone in Canada as members of Parliament. And yes, I get a plane back and forth to Ottawa every time I come here. I don't walk.
You don't?
No, I don't walk here.
Oh, wow.
I actually get a plane.
Oh, wow.
2 planes, actually. I spend a lot of time sitting down waiting. So can this member please explain, should we only abide by what she thinks people are in this House, or do we all have our own identity?
For Lethbridge?
I appreciate the question from that member, and indeed, this member is an honorable one, so we can call him that. He's asking a very good question, and he's making my point exactly. It seems rather ridiculous to be applying a carbon tax to something that people must use. In Canada, we don't have really a choice as to whether or not we're going to heat our homes. So we do. Well, we get penalized by using a carbon tax. We don't really have a choice in such a vast country as to whether or not we need a car for many of us to get to work. Why are those individuals being penalized for making a living? You're a member of Parliament. The member opposite takes a plane here to represent his constituents. Why is that being penalized? These are very good questions, and I encourage him to ask his government.
De commentaires, l'honorable député de Longueuil, Saint-Hubert.
Merci, Mme la Présidente. Bon, le problème avec les conservateurs, c'est qu'ils disent, bon, il faut couper les dépenses, couper les dépenses, couper les dépenses, mais on ne sait jamais trop comment ils vont régler les problèmes. La semaine passée, il y a quelqu'un dans ma circonscription qui s'est ouvert la gorge devant une ressource en itinérance parce qu'il était pris avec des problématiques de santé mentale. Il avait fait une demande pour aller dans un centre pour régler ses problèmes, puis il venait d'apprendre que la place qui avait été réservée pour lui, il ne pourrait pas l'avoir. Donc, il manquait de place. Donc, il y a 2 enjeux là-dedans. Il y a un enjeu de logement, puis un enjeu de santé. Pour s'occuper des problèmes de cette personne-là, il faut investir en santé, puis il faut investir en logement. Puis ça, c'est le gouvernement, la santé. C'est les transferts en santé qu'on demande. Les libéraux, là-bas, ne veulent pas investir en santé. Est-ce que les conservateurs advenants qui arrivent au pouvoir dans quelques années, on ne le souhaite pas nécessairement, mais si ça arrive, est-ce qu'ils vont, eux, faire les transferts en santé comme le demandent toutes les provinces à travers le Canada?
L'honorable député de Lethbridge.
I fail to see the relevance. I recognize that was an important question to the member with regard to healthcare transfers. The topic of conversation today is around the carbon tax and this government's mismanage of the economy. It also has to do with the cost to Canadians. And so I guess where I would perhaps find some commonality with the member is that indeed, Canadians are in a really, really tight spot right now. In trying to make ends meet, and they certainly do need to be helped. I think one of the best ways to help them is by removing the carbon tax and other penalizing policies, including the printing of money, and helping put the faith back in the Canadian people.
Time for a brief question. The honourable member for Cowichan-Mellon-Langford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I had a few questions for the member. Is she aware that under the current Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, there are already wide exemptions in existence for farming fuels? That's written in the Act. And secondly, her colleague from Huron Bruce, he sponsored Bill C-234. The only reason that bill on grain drying made it through committee and was reported back to the House was because of the support of the NDP. So it'd be nice to see some acknowledgement from Conservatives that some of their measures are getting through because of support of other opposition parties.
Brief answer from the member for Lethbridge.
I am baffled as to why the members of the NDP party are consistently supportive of the Liberals. It's really interesting to watch, actually, because on the one side of their face, they support the Liberals and all that they do, and on the other side, where they go after them. And so it's like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, just make up your mind. So I would invite that member to truly be an opposition member and hold the government to account.
Reprise de débat. L'honorable député de Beauce.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je veux féliciter ma collègue de Lethbridge pour son excellent discours, très senti, en lien avec le milieu agricole. Alors, je prends la parole aujourd'hui au sujet de la motion de notre journée d'opposition conservatrice concernant la suppression de la taxe carbone applicable aux intrants et à la production alimentaire.